G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, and this movie is titled The Hypocritical Qunt, Q-U-N-T. Qunt is of course a contraction of Quintica. Everybody knows Australians like contracting their words. Barbecue becomes Barbie, Quintica becomes the Quint. I first met the Quint on a comment thread on one of my movies about atheism and autism, the connection between atheism and autism. When I read a New Scientist article demonstrating that... Sorry, that was a kangaroo fly, they bite. When I read a New Scientist article to camera covering the fact that peer-reviewed research conducted at a Canadian university by a researcher with a Jewish surname, so it was not done by evangelistic fundamentalist Christians, but the research had showed there was a 90% correlation between autism and atheism. I thought that was pretty interesting, and there were 5 other pieces of peer-reviewed research that used much larger survey groups. However, the atheist community on YouTube got their knickers a bit twisted, and one of the people who got his knickers twisted was Fred. Fred took great umbrage at the idea that his hitherto highly prized inability to imagine any God theory complicated enough to run the whole universe may not mean that he had better intellectual prowess than the people who can imagine such a God theory. It may just mean that atheists are colourblind to God. And Fred was the first YouTuber I ever saw doing a walk and talk movie. I've only been on the tubes for 19 months, but I was fascinated by this idea of walking around talking to the camera, contemplating philosophical propositions and interesting facets of life. So I enjoy Fred's work, but on that particular topic of atheism and autism, he and I were kind of at loggerheads, and this Qunt showed up, and the Qunt said that his professor of psychology was deeply interested in the New Scientist article, and the Qunt was quite supportive of me in my flame war with the atheists, which eventually died down when the atheists got used to the idea that I didn't do the research and I don't have the facility to check deeper into the references in the article. All I did was read the New Scientist article to camera. Okay, so then it transpired that I sometimes make movies about antinatalism. I'm not in favour of antinatalism. I think it's a bit of a mistake. I'm pretty well opposed to ephilism, and the Quint began making anti-antinatalism movies and anti-ephilism movies, so he was leaving nice comments on my threads and I was leaving nice comments on his threads. But during the 6 months, I noticed the Quint had become sort of obsessed with antinatalism and ephilism to the degree where he didn't make any movies about anything else. And he was deeply upset at the way the antinatalists challenge people to have an argument or a debate or a dispute, and when the antinatalist or the ethicist seems to be losing, they then get deeply upset and they block whoever has been beating them in an argument. Not all antinatalists, some of them don't block you, but they don't ever answer you. That's Forever Wolf Films' tactic. Somebody like Grey Tycho or Garriott in Mendham, yeah, they just block anybody who pisses them off. My way of looking at it is they cannot face the reality of the feedback, so they edit the feedback to make it appear that they have universal support for their ideology. So it makes them less credible in my view because they block. They cannot cope with criticism or dissent. So I was fully supporting the Quint with his campaign of ridicule against the people who block. Alright, what I was unaware of was that 6 months before I met the Quint, he and Fred, Conference Report, had come to loggerheads over a movie that Fred had posted and then it had been flagged and deleted, and Fred had made another movie outlining his views about free speech and how YouTube should allow people to broadcast whatever they like, and if somebody doesn't want to watch it, they don't have to watch it, but he doesn't think people should be allowed to flag videos and have them deleted. It's his political view. I think he's entitled to it. I don't think YouTube are likely to adopt his view anytime soon, but I understand his right to vent his opinion. Apparently, because I didn't see the original comment thread, the Qunt decided to explain to Fred why YouTube is YouTube and how slavishly they follow the mores of the American middle class. The people who've got an IQ between 95 and 105, they make up 60% of the population. It's who all the advertising is aimed at. If you've got an IQ below 95, it doesn't fucking matter. You can't follow the argument. If you've got an IQ over 105, it doesn't fucking matter. You're probably educated to the point where you can't make anything for yourself, so you're going to buy whatever's on the shops. Right? You are statistically irrelevant. The entire American advertising economy, and YouTube's a part of that, is aimed at normal people, statistically normal people with a statistically normal average intelligence. And Quantica, the Qunt, worships American statistical perspective of normality. Right? And he explained in glowing terms to Fred why YouTube was perfectly entitled to delete movies that were likely to upset middle-class, normal American, smug, self-righteous, arrogant people. Because that's what they are in America. And Fred said to the Qunt, you look like, you sound like, you appear like, maybe you appear to be a corporate apologist. Now that's what he said. It was factually accurate. It was in context. It was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. Right? Quantica was parroting the company line. Fred said, you look like a corporate apologist. This meant that Quantica was unable to respond without giving ground. He would have had to say, oh, well, yeah, I guess it does look like that. And he would have had to shut his mouth. But he didn't want to because he already had this argumentation going with Fred. So the Qunt, at that point, revealed his true character. He demonstrated that he suffers a personality flaw where he had some kind of an ego-driven arrest mentally at about age 8, where any time he thinks he's losing, he has to go to an all-out response, you know, like the thermonuclear spasm response. Fred said, you look like a corporate apologist, or you sound like a corporate apologist. The Qunt said, well, to me, you look like a scruffy old queer. Okay, you can learn a lot about somebody, about their assumptions and their worldview and their perceptions and what they think is normal and how their mind works by how they compose insults. If you call somebody a pig, it's because you think a pig is a bad thing. You think a pig is filthy, lazy, dirty, wallowing in the mud. It means you don't know much about pigs, but it means you think a pig is a really bad thing. That's why you put it in an insult. You think it is a fit term to be put in an insult because it's obviously automatically bad. So a triple-barreled insult, scruffy old queer. Fred sometimes makes movies with a 5-day growth of beard. If Johnny Depp makes a movie with a 5-day growth of beard, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon even, they're considered to be ruggedly handsome and sexually attractive. But Quantica thinks that when a 50-ish man has a 5-day growth of beard and is otherwise wearing not much but underpants, that's scruffy. He's not neatly enough dressed for the fashion fascist, neatnik, effete Qunt's personal tastes. Okay, scruffy. That's what it's told us about Quantica. Everything's got to be neatly perfumed and coiffured or otherwise shaven away. Old. Okay, so the Qunt is an ageist. If you're not young, you have no value, you have no worth, you shouldn't be putting movies on YouTube because you're old. Scruffy, old. Okay, he's an ageist. And queer. Okay. Queer in the sense of homosexual. To the Qunt, homosexual equals bad. The only people in the world who think homosexual equals bad and is therefore worthy of incorporating into a triple-barreled insult as the colophon or finishing stroke to the insult, the only people who think like that are called homophobes. They are afraid of homosexuality and they are afraid of homosexuals, and they therefore demonise them in speech and actions and behaviour. Okay, so I called him a homophobe and an ageist and an effete, a fashionista. And the Qunt decided to defend himself by explaining that in terms of his understanding of the preferences and mores of middle-class Americana, nobody wants to see a scruffy old queer. You know, if Fred had been, quote, a hot young babe, naked or near naked, that would have been perfectly acceptable. That would have been art. So he's a sexist as well. Now, I wasn't going to back down because I wasn't wrong. I was actually correct and accurate. It was the Qunt who had hyper-reacted to Fred, and then he literally hyper-reacted to me, and he blocked me and he deleted me from the comment thread. So he became as blocky as an effalist. Which brings me to another point. The last 3 months' worth of the Qunt's movies, sometimes 3 a day, 15 minutes long, endlessly the same movie over and over and over again. And he's imitating the antinatalists and the effalists that he hates. He's not attacking them, he's not analysing them, he's not deconstructing them. He's merely imitating their style as faithfully as possible in the sure and certain delusion that everybody in the world is going to understand that he's mocking them. But that's only clear to him. For a month at least, he's been making pro-antinatalist movies, thinking they're anti-antinatalist movies. He's an unravelling individual in the grip of a personal crusade to punish anybody in the world that he thinks deserves punishment for being wimpy and pussy-ish, because he loves sexist insults. That's why I've shortened his name from Quintica to the Qunt, because I know the Qunt will annoy him. I know it'll get up his nose because he thinks vaginas are worthy of being used in an insult. He calls people pussies all the time. You weak pussy. You wimpish pussy. You're such a pussy. The Qunt calling people pussies. The Qunt calling people hypocrites. Okay, so what did the Qunt do after blocking me? The Qunt decided that seeing as this whole issue was over art and the definition of art, he went stalking Fred, found a Facebook page or some kind of blog site where Fred had described his workplace as being a university, an art-based university or art-oriented university, and himself as being a professor of some kind of art. So the Qunt got in touch with Fred's employer to ask them if they could adjudicate and tell him whether Fred was right, that his deleted movie was in fact art. And because Fred has decided that he does not need that level of overreactive, vicious intervention in his workplace by some vindictive, arrogant, ignorant, uneducated American twerp, and that there's a bunch of them out there. You know, I mean, there's 350 million or so people live in America, 375 million, whatever it is. There is quite a lot of potential crusaders among them. So Fred took his YouTube channel down. YouTube has lost a really interesting original thinker because Quintica couldn't cope with being wrong. Twice. Once to Fred, once to me. And he's gone and had a ballistic reaction where he's going to clean up the internet Or because he thinks he knows about art because he managed a band. That's his grip on the world of art. He was a roadie, a band manager, and he's a big friend of same-sex attracted people because he knew a lesbian once. Yeah, okay. Which leaves us with the question of why did the Qunt react so strongly to discovering that he was a homophobe? He's got just a little bit of psychological training. He's got a professor of psychology, so he says, or he had one once. So therefore he probably knows that the reason homophobes are afraid of homosexuals is because homophobes are afraid of responding favourably to a homosexual advance. Homophobes are scared that if a poofter grabs them by the arse, they might actually bar up. So being afraid of homosexuals is an expression of their fear that they might be a homosexual. That's why they want to bash poofters to death. That's why they hang around public toilets looking for a poofter to beat up. That's homophobia. So when I left him no room for manoeuvre, and he had to admit that his insult was in fact homophobic, it meant that he had to also grasp the concept that he might be a closet homosexual himself. You know, maybe this is why he's got no girlfriend. It's why he's had himself vasectomised so he can't have any kids, because he's not an antinatalist, he just doesn't want to have any kids. And he spends his life studying antinatalist videos and pretty much imitating them. He says he's got a job, but I figure he's spending about 12 hours a day on YouTube, making movies, commenting on movies, watching movies, filming movies, cutting and shutting other people's movies so he can whinge and bitch about them. I don't see where he finds time to work. Maybe he's been retrenched and he's unravelling because of that. He's a fashionista and an effete, so maybe he eats too many steroids, you know. He's disintegrating to a steroid rage. But as far as I can see, YouTube has lost a really good user in Fred, and we haven't gained much at all by having Quantica still there. I don't know whether the Qunt would have worked himself up to this pitch of feverish hatred of Fred without the flirting and the gingering up that's been provided to him by Carmel 1119. And of course Carmel doesn't like Fred because Fred was one of the first people to question Carmel's actual identity. And that's apparently such a mysterious conundrum wrapped in the mist of vagueness that there's almost a betting pool going on as to Carmel's actual identity. Man, woman, gay guy, bull dyke, cock in a frock, cut and shut. Nobody knows who or what Carmel is, and that's the way Carmel likes it. But Carmel has been gingering up Quantica in his campaign against Fred. And because she's been gingering up Quantica and left her traces all over his threads, people are nearly as peeved at her support for Quantica as they are at Quantica's vigilante vendetta against Conference Report. And yeah, I'm pissed off about it myself because I like watching Fred's vids. I think they were stimulating and thought-provoking in an intellectual sense. He knew stuff that I'd never heard of. You know, somebody would say something to him and he'd come up with vast scads of philosophical references without having to and and look at a book, and he had it all in his mind, you know, like Fred's as smart as Quantica would like to be, and Quantica is smart enough to notice that he personally is smarter than average, but Quantica is not smart enough to realise that there are people who are much smarter than him. So, there you go. If that makes any sense of the shit fight between the Qunt and Fred, with Carmel adding fuel to the fire, good luck to you. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.